More American patriots for Ukrainian patriots. Peace, action or inaction? Who and which kind of peace wants for Ukraine? No ban for Taliban. Terrorist love story from Russia. This topic in more detail. Good afternoon. It's me, Henry Keane, at UATV English Studio, as usually giving the hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. NATO member states undertook to provide Ukraine with new air defense systems. The US President Joe Biden, in his solemn speech at the opening of the NATO summit in Washington, called this US decision as historic.
Ukraine can and will stop Putin. Especially with our full collective support. And they have our full support. Nearly 24 allied partners have signed the bilateral security agreements with Ukraine, and more countries will follow. Today, I'm announcing the historic donation of air defense equipment for Ukraine. The United States, Germany, the Netherlands, Romania, and Italy will provide Ukraine with the equipment for 5 additional strategic air defense systems. And in the coming months, the United States and our partners intend to provide Ukraine with dozens of additional tactical air defense systems. The United States will make sure that when we export critical air defense interceptors, Ukraine goes to the front of the line.
President Biden also recalled the previously announced commitment the USA will ensure that during the delivery of interceptor missiles, Ukraine receives them out of turn, he said. Worth noting, however, that 4 out of 5 these new systems announced by Biden were already announced before, and one of which, the German one, has already been put on duty for the armed services of Ukraine. So Biden's announcement essentially refers to the delivery of another new Patriot system, which will be allocated by the United States itself, and significant number of shorter-range systems. Sometimes I really am surprised how obvious things are not quite obvious to some. I guess the same way the common sense is not so common for some. But then I hear someone like the leader of Republicans in the US Senate, Mitch McConnell, who was speaking at the Reagan Institute in Washington and clearly said it was the delay in aid to Ukraine that increased the duration of this war unleashed by Russia. He emphasized that Ukrainians on the battlefield do not need doubts and discussions, but they need tools to protect themselves and to increase the price of aggression for the aggressor. So to create conditions for talking about real peace, but from a position of real strength, as it is the only language that Kremlin actually respects and understands. Slow aid to Ukraine has not stopped Russia from escalating. It has only ensured that this terrible conflict will last longer and be bloodier, McConnell said. Delaying further aid will weaken Ukraine and create risks of encouraging every tyrant that Western countries want to defeat, the senator noted. The security of the free world will either be strengthened by the victory of our friends or weakened by their defeat, he emphasized. And while hearing this, we also hear that the president of Slovakia, Peter Pellegrini, says that his country advocates restraint in negotiations on Ukraine's accession to NATO in order to prevent escalation, of course. Well, I can offer Mr. Pellegrini a visit to a children's hospital in Kiev, where children already fighting cancer were also assaulted by Russian missiles. Talk to these children, Mr. Pellegrini. And while talking, just close your eyes for a bit of a second and imagine you're talking to Slovakian children. Now open your eyes and face the fact, losing time, that is an escalation or war and Putin's aggression. Being an EU politician who has been bought by Putin, that is an escalation of war. Being cowardly, timid, and outrageously slow when decisiveness is the key to the Council of Human Values and ought to be protected by military means here and now. That delay is an escalation of war, Mr. Pellegrini, as well as advocating restraint in Slovakia while children die in Ukraine. That also looks quite like an escalation to me. The United States, China, or the European Union could hypothetically act as mediators between Russia and Ukraine, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky said. Zelensky expressed this opinion in response to the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, trying to be the mediator between Kiev and Moscow. Orban that sent a secret letter to the head of the European Council, Charles Michel. The letter is dated July 5th and was sent from Azerbaijan, where Orban went after meeting with Putin. The document, as media writes, is not intended for the general public. Journalists received a document from a European official. Its authenticity was confirmed by 2 more EU officials. Orban writes that during his trips to Ukraine and Russia, he did not speak on behalf of the EU as a whole, but only wanted to learn the positions of the warring parties. It is noteworthy that Orban barely mentions Zelensky's position, but eloquently describes Putin's views in every detail. Well, there are different mediators. We know it all well in Ukraine. Sometimes it's not even very clear to me intermediaries between what and why they're trying to be. I mean Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was on a 2-day official visit to Russia and made a direct appeal to end the war in Ukraine, no less. He stated this during an informal meeting with dictator Putin. I quote, "India has always called for respect for the UN Charter, including territorial integrity and sovereignty. There is no solution on the battlefield. Dialogue and diplomacy are the way forward," Modi said. Well, let us all remember that Modi never even cared to even condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, brutally ruining our sovereignty and territorial integrity. Yet Modi kind of informs the Russian Tsar that the death of innocent Ukrainian children during the war is very painful to him. I don't even know what to call it, really. I think international politics' usual level of hypocrisy dropped to a new low, when it is totally okay when not only are you not calling a spade, a murderer the murderer, but you come to visit him, kind of asking the murderer to stop killing Ukrainian children already, but you know for sure that he will be killing more. And the murderer, in turn, knows for sure you still won't even condemn the very fact of his invasion of Ukraine that caused this very children death. Well, so much for very painful. The Taliban organization banned in Russia is an ally of the Russian Federation in the fight against terrorism, Putin said. You heard me just right. Lack of logic have never been an obstacle for the Kremlin to not only talk fabulous nonsense, here is proof directly from the first dictatorial lips, if you will. The banned in Russia terrorist organization Taliban is now Russia's best friend. The Taliban was called what it is, a terrorist organization in Russia in 2003. Previously, a similar decision regarding these terrorists was made by the UN Security Council. After militants seized power in Afghanistan in 2021, Russian Tsar said that Russia was, I quote, moving towards removing the ban from Taliban from a ban list of terrorists. At the time, however, Putin mentioned that he awaits for that same decision to be made by UN first. Well, no need to wait any longer. At the end of May, Putin was informed that the Taliban movement could be excluded from the list of organizations banned in Russia, regardless of the UN. You know what? I agree. Yes, that's the right decision, Putin. No, the Taliban have not started respecting human rights all of a sudden. And no, the Taliban has not abandoned terrorism as the only existential paradigm they are aware of. And no, the Taliban have not become a more civilized terrorist organization. They still produce heroin and still abduct and torture and murder. So it's not the Taliban that rose in social ranks or status. It was Russia who sunk down to it. Now the two are clearly one and the same, two terrorist countries found in a common language and stopped calling themselves terrorists respectively in a warm terrorist hug suite. Well, that is logical. No friends in Europe and America left for Russia, so who's left? Terrorist groups in the Middle East remain. The Houthis, for example, who operate in Yemen, the Islamic State or Hamas. But you need to understand one simple thing in very easy terms here. As soon as just one Russian missile appears in the possession of these Houthis, Putin will be wanted by the ICC not only for kidnapping children in Ukraine, but for assisting international terrorist organizations. But even if Putin does not care about the ICC, he has to care about Saudi Arabia, as the Houthis are inveterate enemies of Saudi Arabia. They sometimes allow themselves to do drone assaults against Saudi oil facilities. That's why. So now, if it turns out that Russia is supplying the Houthis with weapons, including long-range Iskander missiles, for example, then Russia's relations with Al Riyadh of Saudi Arabia will deteriorate fast and severely. And there is a lot that depends on the Middle East from who the Saudi Arabia likes or not. Well, in easy terms, go on, Putin, that's the way to go. Wherever you hang out with, that's how you'll gain. Thank you so very much for watching. It was Us Ukraine and me, Henry Keane at UATV English, giving you some hard truth in easy terms. Subscribe, like and comment. Your voice in turn helps Ukrainian voice to be heard globally, and that's important. Thank you for that. Stay safe and tune for more already tomorrow. Goodbye.